Oh, shit! You know, I would just like to once have a good night's sleep. But when someone posts something wrong about Socionics, I just have to correct it. And that's the thing with judgments. They'll be there to make you feel you really ought to do something, even when there are other things you'd want to do. Last time, we looked at the two perceptions, intuition and sensation, and how they can be divided into ideas, force, senses, and time, or telos. Today, we'll be looking at judgments. But first, you might ask, what are judgments? Remember when I said that perceptions were irrational, in that they lacked a reason why you should do them, you just wanted to? Well, judgments are the opposite. They have a reason. They are what Jung would have called rational information. Inherent to every judgment is a sense of ought or should. I should do this, I ought to make sure this happens, etc. This is where ideas of right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse, correct or incorrect come into the picture. There are also two main kinds of judgments. These are ethics and logic. They are quite straightforward to tell apart. If you remember, there are two sets of dichotomies for that. We looked before at external and internal. This was about how objective and shareable, or subjective and interpreted, a kind of information is. Logic would be external, as it deals with objective rules and facts. When someone communicates with logic, they are providing objective reasons that someone else ought to understand and appreciate, or else defeat with objectively better reasons. With watertight logic, two very different people are able to reach exactly the same conclusions. For instance, should I say that 2 + 2 = 4, only the most brainwashed prole of Airstrip 1 would try to deny the validity of that statement. With ethics, which would be internal, things are completely different. Ethics is subjective. It originates in the cockles of one's heart, and that is something too personal a place from which to guarantee a consensus. Only if someone else feels the same way will an agreement be reached. If you were to feel upset about something, say, you lost at a game of bowling, there'll be very little you can do to convince another person who recently won a beauty contest to feel sad. After all, they're probably very happy, and no matter how much you describe the facts of the case behind your loss, there is no guarantee that will stir the same depression in their heart that you are currently feeling. At best, you might be able to provoke some sympathy. As before, the second dichotomy is involved and detached. This was about how we interact with the information, whether being felt vivaciously or simply thought about as something removed from ourselves. I don't think I need to explain why logic is something we think about dispassionately, while ethics is something we feel sentimentally. Carl Jung called them thinking and feeling after all. So now, instead of two perceptions, we have two judgments. The external, detached, logic, and the internal, involved, ethics. Once again, though, we can't just stop at two. Like the perceptions, judgments divide up into 4 information metabolism elements. To achieve this division, we have another set of dichotomies. Static and dynamic is the first. If you recall, it focuses on the substance of the information, whether it is composed of fixed, standalone parts, this would be static, or something in continuous flux, which would be dynamic. The second is extroverted and introverted, the volume of the information, whether to increase and diversify the quantity or selectively refine it in quality. Judgments must either be introverted and static, or else extroverted and dynamic. The former is something like a principle, where one should stick to its command without compromise, a single black and white rule or attitude, where change would be a violation. It is either correct or incorrect. The latter, on the other hand, would be dynamic, because instead of sticking firmly to one principle, it would maximize its goodness, being the best it can be across various situations. This would not be a simple right or wrong, but instead a better or a worse compared to alternatives, with the very best option rapidly changing with the situation as time relentlessly pushes on. To use an analogy, introverted and static would be like an elegant statue of glass. It stays quiet and still, for it cannot move. It must not move. To move would be to strain its brittle composition. It will break, with only the pieces of a compromised integrity remaining to be swept away. In contrast, I like to think of extroverted and dynamic as a raging tempest, a storm from which you cannot pick any particular part, but instead can only see the general movement and direction. Instead of needing not to change, it is changed by its very nature. It keeps going, moving the air within it around and around, the pressure higher and higher. It must keep going. If ever it were to pause, it would fade away into nothing. In these ways, we see the differing approaches of judgment. One, to preserve its integrity. The other, to constantly revise its approach. In short, when judgment is introverted and static, it's about sticking firmly to a few very important things, with any change being a compromise on that integrity. Meanwhile, when judgment is extroverted and dynamic, it's about taking on lots and lots of different things, with a particular priority changing depending on the situation. If we take these two approaches, static introversion and dynamic extroversion, and apply them to logic and ethics, we get the four remaining information metabolism elements. Taking a static, introverted approach to logic is the most black and white. It's rigorously structured and consistency focused in telling you what is correct or incorrect. This is the approach that philosophers call analytic a priori knowledge. The idea we can find out the truth of something just by thinking about it. This is done by setting out key axioms from which everything true follows and which everything false contradicts. Think of it as taking the stars in the sky and finding a way to connect all the different stars together into a constellation, using the fewest lines possible. In Socionics, this is known as introverted logic, or laws, as it sees truth as a set of rules that can explain things without contradiction. A dynamic, extroverted approach to logic brings a very different attitude to truth. Instead of a grand theory or a set of maxims, this approach seeks to continuously learn and adapt its knowledge base to a rapidly updating reality, constantly taking in factual data and looking at how it can be applied to create the most efficient method for the situation. This synthetic a posteriori knowledge, as philosophers call it, looks at how things are shown to work as its marker for truth. A marker in pencil, because it is only ever the closest approximation. This is known in socionics as extroverted logic, or pragmatism, because it treats truth pragmatically, as what is shown to currently work best. In contrast, a static, introverted approach to ethics is going to be far more personal and sentimental. Rather than determining a logical truth, introverted ethics, also known as relations, involves the particular attitude one feels about certain people or things. By making value judgments of how something feels, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? That person creates a relationship with the object of affection. If you like someone, and if you feel they have a good character, naturally you want to get closer to them and become more intimate. If you don't like someone, you probably wouldn't want to touch them with a barge pole. The idea is that introverted ethics wants to preserve the integrity of its relationships, remaining faithful to your friends and wary of those you don't like. Finally, there is a dynamic, extroverted approach to ethics. Instead of preserving relationships according to set attitudes towards people, this extroverted ethics, known as emotions, is all about our waxing and waning emotional states and their communication to other people, provoking changes and reactions across a whole society. Rather than approach people based on the closeness of your relationships, the emphasis is on your mood, whether you're feeling great or feeling terrible, and expressing that mood so that others can share in and validate the feeling, magnifying its intensity. With laws, pragmatism, emotions, and relations, we have now defined the 4 information metabolism elements of judgment. Having defined all 8 elements, we can now begin to see how these figurative atoms block together to form molecules. Tune in next time to find out more about this process of blocking and how from it we can begin to see the predominant themes of Socionics type. Thank you for tuning in to our introductory series to Socionics. If you like our videos, please subscribe and click the little bell so you're notified when we release new videos. Also, please consider becoming a patron of the World Socionic Society. You can do this by clicking the link below.